The presentation you're about to see is a guide for employers on the new Fit for Work service that's being rolled out as we speak. The Fit for Work service is a new service, a free service for all employers and employees, which will provide practical help and advice to enable employees to get back to work as soon as possible. That will bring very real benefits for both business and, importantly, for the UK economy. And good morning. That's me. Who am I? Why am I here? Well, I was at the time I was Director General for the British Chambers of Commerce, and my role was to represent the interests of 100,000 British businesses, and all my life has been spent working in, with, and for business. And I was asked by the then Secretary of State to work with Dame Carol Black, who's an acknowledged expert on health and well-being, to really produce a report on how we really stop significant numbers of people dropping out of work onto a life on benefits. I think it's fair to say that before I got involved in this, I had very little involvement in the health side. A business does not really, certainly small, medium-sized business, does not really get involved in the health and well-being agenda. I think my limitation had been going to the GP and going to the hospital when my two children were born, and involvement in actually some of the policy side and the reasons for people going off long-term sick was not. But I had a process of total immersion for a period of getting on for 2 years, and in fact I'm still actively involved in this field, working with Public Health England, not least on some of the work and well-being stuff that they're doing. So as I say, I was asked to work with this review, and the report was commissioned, which I'll come on to, because a significant number of people dropping out of work onto a life on benefits. We were asked to, as you can see from those bullet points, how the current sickness absence system could be changed to help people stay in work, reduce costs, and importantly contribute to growth. Importantly, were the balance of the costs appropriately shared between the three key stakeholders, the state, the employer, and the employee, and to make recommendations for change. This is important in an overall context, clearly, because one, we're all having to work longer. The default retirement age has gone. The state retirement age is rising, and because our pensions are shot to pieces, we're going to have to work longer. So a very strong economic imperative to actually try and hold people into work. So some basic stats. About 11 million take some sick leave every year. A lot of coughs, colds, flu going around at the moment, but we get back to work. But about 300,000 people a year drop out of work onto those state-related benefits. That is a very, very big number. And indeed, about 140,000 drop out each year straight out of work, straight onto benefits without any form of sickness absence in the middle. These are big numbers, and you can see from that the cost to the employer, to the taxpayer, and importantly to the individual. And I think that was the first message that I really picked up, is that there is not a coherent, or was not, I suppose this still is not, a coherent message from government and its agencies that work is good for you. Work, clearly not for everybody, but work is good for the vast majority of people. It's good for your health, it's good for your mental well-being, and it's clearly good for your wealth as well. But there isn't a message that really relays that powerful message. I think the other issue to say is that whilst everybody gets impacted by long-term sickness absence, there is a core group in there, and the core group is over 50-something, over 50-something males, and over 50-something males with low educational achievement, low skills, therefore in manual labour. So, typified by someone perhaps working in a warehouse, distribution, building site, builder's yard. And that, I think, is also an issue, because, as I said, we're all being encouraged to work longer, and it's okay for the educated middle class, if I can typify the audience as that, understanding that agenda. But if I left school at 15 with no qualifications, and I've been doing manual work, and I've been in and out of work for up until my mid-50s, it's perhaps a different proposition to hold me into work, and I think we really need to address that issue as well. But there is clearly a significant human impact on this. So what we discovered was, one, that the current system, or then current system, was flawed, and we started with a blank sheet of paper and said, well, okay, if we were designing a system which would stop people, this 300,000 dropping out of work onto benefits, well, what would it look like? And well, clearly there are people who drop out of work who are incapable of going back. That may be for some particular illness, medical condition, but the system should be able to identify those quite rapidly and put in place real support. It should give early support to those able to get back to work, and those helping needed to change job to do that. And what we saw is the current system actually did none of those at all. Now, why is that important? Well, what we discovered, and all the research led us to, is that once you've been out of work for circa 4 weeks, it becomes ever more difficult to get you back into work. There's a sort of trigger point when you've been away from work that almost every day from then it becomes exponentially more difficult to actually bring you back. And I use a personal story on that. When I was a student at university in the 70s, there was a period of a lot of strikes. I worked on a building site with a handful of other undergraduates. There was a strike in our suppliers, and but we had to turn up every day for work, and we just lay in the sun, and until the tap was turned back on and the supplies came. But when that happened, we completely lost the will to work. We were, until the site manager gave us a good and well-deserved kick to get back to work, we were just, lazing around. Now, if that's for supposedly bright young people, what's it like if you're again part of this 50-something group who's been away from work? And what we saw is that the current system actually doesn't try and pull you back. And again, as part of my research work for this, if you sit at home and you're watching daytime TV all the time, is that going to encourage you to want to get back to work? And if you haven't already done, I suggest you watch Jeremy Kyle, great daytime TV, and some of the cases that Jeremy Kyle has to look through. I mean, I'd say the sectors of society that I've certainly never come across or didn't know existed till I watched it. But if you're in that environment where you've got 4 blank walls at home, no one's in contact with you. After that period of 4 weeks, it becomes very, very hard to get back. So we saw it as really critical to have some form of intervention. So then we came on to the fit note and the central role of the GP. And we know that most people with common health conditions can work. That, fact. But when we looked at the fit notes, we saw that about 83% of people who are being signed off for over a week were being signed off as really entirely incapable for work. So something was wrong there. And on the back of that, much of the advice from healthcare professionals, as you see there, was to refrain from work. We saw clear evidence, by the way, of people who, when we did focus groups around the country, who wanted to work, wanted to get back to work, saw the importance of social interaction, because we all know work's not just about getting a check at the end of the month, but it's about the working, being with people, the social interaction, being part of a group, part of a team who wanted to do it, but were being told no, you can't, or provided with advice that the employer would clearly say, well, it's going to be difficult for us to have you back there. So there was an issue there, and what employers said is that they lacked access to independent advice. A lot of larger companies have occupational health services. Why? It's to verify what is often being said in the fit note. Look, is this right? When they want to know, when is my employee coming back, or if my employee is coming back, and what do I need to do to ensure they're going to make a sort of valuable contribution once they do so. And that wasn't there until now. The small businesses in the main don't use occupational health. We know that, and they have as I say, a very difficult view in responding to what's on a fit note. And of course, small businesses take the word of a GP as something that is not to be questioned. You know, people have said in previous groups, well, you know, why not ring up the GP and have a chat with them about the employee? Well, you know, that doesn't happen. Or why don't you write and get a response? Well, by the time you've got a response, you're well beyond those 28 days. So the system doesn't work. Now, I'm not going to blame, in quotes, GPs. We all know from our own personal experience that they are under relentless pressure. They have, 7 or 8 minutes with each patient. Their responsibility is to that patient. And I know from my own, the area where I live, my own GP, even though the only way to get to see a GP is often through an emergency surgery, which the 40 minutes before the doors open to actually get an appointment, there's a queue of people 20 deep. They are under relentless pressure to actually to see patients, and they don't have enough time with them. And how are they supposed really to get an understanding of what sort of job the person does, what sort of business that they're working in? It can't be done. And we also, in some of the groups around the country, saw clear evidence from GPs who felt, to be quite frank, particularly in some inner city areas, under immense pressure to actually sign people off, you know, intimidated almost, because you know, let's face up to it, there are people who do not want to work, and they were having to deal with that. So all of that comes together. But you know, the GP is central, the fit note is key, but for many small businesses, the system is not working. And the EEF have just done some work on the fit note, and you know, well over 40% believe that the introduction of the fit note has not made any difference to the information that they're getting from their employee, but a critical part of the system. So what do we do? Well, we, having gone through all the work, we had a fantastic team at DWP working for us, who were incredibly rigorous with the looking at the proposals we came up with. We said, well, look, we think there should be an independent assessment service for businesses and their employees, particularly small, medium-sized employees, to actually be able to work with. There should be a job brokering service for those that need to change jobs. Coming back to it, you know, if you're in your 50s and you've got a severe musculoskeletal problem, well, you may not be able to go back in the builder's yard, but is there some opportunity of working in a lighter environment? Reform of the current state benefit system, important again, another way in which people were being held out of work. Frequently we saw with Job Centre Plus is that people were being told, well, actually, there's it's not job seekers allowance you should be on, it's employment support allowance. Thing with employment support allowance, no conditionality to look for work. Therefore, yet again, pulling you out from the labour force rather than pulling you in. Proposed the challenge to the public sector, certain wider issues. The public sector has high levels of absence in the private sector. There is no argument about that. That is not to say public sector bad, private sector good, but because we saw clear evidence where a new management team had been brought into a public sector organisation with a clear remit to bring down levels of sickness absence. It could be done in 18 months to the best in the private sector. Change tax rules, important. It was a disincentive to invest in the health of your employee. It was a taxable benefit. Well, you know, again, if that's a taxable benefit, there's not the incentive for the employer or the employee to invest in making, you know, rapid improvements to get you back to work. And really key, and this underpins, I think, everything, better management training. Now, why is that important? Because again, when we did this work, what employers would tell us is that there has been a generational shift. My generation, there was a clear split between work and home. I did not take, or my generation did not take their domestic problems to work. Employers now will say that has morphed. And they're faced with employees who are bringing problems from their domestic life to the office. And they're expecting the employer to deal with that. and that is not easy. If you have an employee who's being abused at home, who has got perhaps problems with their children and drug alcohol abuse, financial problems, I as an employer, I think have it's a much more difficult conversation to have than if someone comes and tells me, look, I've done my back in, putting the car seat in on Saturday morning. You can have that discussion, but if an employee who's tearful and starts to open up about problems of abuse, that is not easy. And the net result is employers, and particularly I think line managers, often run away from that. And we're not doing anything like enough to do effective management training for this. What we tend to do in this country is management. If I am good at selling widgets and I'm better than all my colleagues, I become the manager of those people. But I'm given no effective training as to some of the wider skills that are necessary in dealing with people, and particularly in this field of sickness absence. So I just think we need to do far more to do it, because what, as I say, is happening is employers or line managers, not always, but clearly, I just find that whole conversation a very difficult thing to have. Now, clearly, there's a lot of HR people in this room who, won't understand that, will be able to have those conversations, but you're not in that field, not particularly easy. So that was the conclusions. We produced this great tome, which you see there. And we said, look, if you make reform, the benefits could be really quite significant for the UK. And you can see the figures that are there. They are not insubstantial figures. Well, the government responded with another equally large tome in the beginning of 2013. And I think importantly and significantly, they bought into the vast majority of the recommendations. The tax, first one being tax exemption for employer-funded occupational health treatments, up to 500 per person per year for their employee. That is, I think, builds into the new service that we have, very valuable because it incentivises rather than discourages employers to get involved in small-scale treatment. Scrapping what was termed the percentage threshold scheme, even though I represented the business community. Here we had a scheme that was costing £50 million a year, where if my sickness absence levels were higher than the average, I got a rebate from the government. Well, lunacy, and that encouraged bad behaviour. So that went, and our independent assessment service was not felt by ministers to having, quote, a section of title, so they said it should become the Health and Work Advisory Service. Then went to number 10, and they thought, well, you can forget that, that's not a section of either, so we're going to call it the Fit for Work Service. What it is, it's a government funded, it's delivered by Health Manager. You're going to hear about this after myself. The pilots were started in Sheffield in March and being rolled out. It's based on a telephone assessment, and what it ends up with is a return to work plan for employees to work with for their employers. There we can see, I'm not going to go through all of that, but that's what it was set out on the website. As I say, the employer rollout, which is why you're here today, has started. It's with employees' consent. It's a consultation over the phone. But there are issues, and I think there are issues certainly for myself as one of the co-authors of the report. It's voluntary. What do you do about people who want to play the system? You all know it's the 1% of employees who cause 90% of the problems. So people who want to game the system, how do we deal with that? I think it needs to be reviewed after 12 months. I know there's a review process going on at the moment, and I think, quite frankly, we should be looking, if it's not making a significant dent in the 300,000 numbers, as some form of compulsion. And finally, I think an electronic fit note is going to be central. It's going to be central because it allows us to measure, allows us to see about referral patterns, allows us to geographically see what's occurring. So that will be central as well. But overall, I think that the service, the Fit for Work service that you'll hear about today to learn something of, meets a vast majority of the design criteria that we set out. We said that particularly for small, medium-sized businesses, there is a lack of a service to provide help and practical advice for employees to come back to work. One. Secondly, it hits at this critical period of 28 days or thereabouts, which we know is the trigger point to really long-term sickness. If we don't get them at that stage, it becomes ever more impossible to bring them back to work. And I personally take a lot of interest in how this happens, but certainly I believe very strongly that it is going to make a significant difference, particularly for the small businesses that I have worked with and continue to work with as we speak. So that's how we got here. Thank you very much.